It was 1977 when the Save Our Children campaign, headed by evangelical Christian ANITA BRYANT, first began its work. It was a political coalition formed in an effort to overturn recent legislation that banned discrimination in several areas, including employment based on sexual orientation. The fact that this new legislation would have prevented people being fired just because they're gay was something that BRYANT couldn't abide. She claimed, "The ordinance condones immorality and discriminates against my children's rights to grow up in a healthy, decent community." Save Our Children campaigned for a referendum for people to be able to vote on overturning the legislation. At a press conference, ANITA BRYANT also said that gay people were trying to recruit our children into homosexuality. Their campaign and petition was successful, and they turned in over 64,000 signatures in favour of a referendum. Again, I want to go back to these direct quotes, this time from a piece of campaign literature. "There is a real danger that homosexual teachers, social workers or counsellors, simply by public acknowledgement of their lifestyles, can encourage sexual deviation in children." When the referendum came, voters supported the repeal of the gay rights legislation, and Save Our Children had won. There were deaths in the aftermath. Robert Hillsborough, who was stabbed 15 times in the face and chest while his attackers chanted the F slur.
Last year, Dade County voters overwhelmingly repealed an ordinance granting special privileges to homosexuals. But the militant homosexuals don't take no for an answer. Now they're hoping voters all across Florida on November the 7th will amend the state's constitution, opening the door for homosexuals to marry and even adopt children.
The Orange Bowl Parade, Miami's gift to the nation, wholesome entertainment. But in San Francisco, when they take to the streets, it's a parade of homosexuals. Men hugging other men, cavorting with little boys, wearing dresses and makeup. The same people who turned San Francisco into a hotbed of homosexuality want to do the same thing to Florida. On November 7th, vote against Constitutional Revision 2, Florida's gay rights proposal. Vote against Constitutional Revision number 2.
Save Our Children wasn't finished. They continued their campaign, supporting various pieces of legislation or votes across the country, including the notorious Prop 8 in California, which would have made it legal to fire not only gay employees, but employees of any sexuality who stood up for gay rights.
There are already laws on the books to protect our children. Everybody from superintendent of schools Wilson Riles to Jerry Brown to newspaper editors across the state agree that indeed we have the laws to protect our children. I was born of heterosexual parents. I was taught by heterosexual teachers in a fiercely heterosexual society with television ads and newspaper ads, fiercely heterosexual, a society that puts down homosexuality. And why am I homosexual if I'm affected by role models? I should have been a heterosexual. And no offense meant, but if teachers are going to affect you as role models, there'd be a lot of nuns running around the streets today.
Now flash forward to 2019, in a year where 600 Muslim children aged between 4 and 11 were removed from classes for a day to protest inclusive LGBT lessons. The protesters held signs saying things like, "Education, not indoctrination," "Say no to promoting homosexuality and LGBT ways of life to our children," "Stop exploiting children's innocence," "Indoctrination," "promotion," "exploitation." That sound familiar? These emotive words have a history tied to the spectre of homophobia that we still see across the world today. And it's that history that we cannot forget, which I want to talk about today in this video. A lot has been said about the situation that's currently happening in Birmingham with the No Outsiders programme.
A very dangerous, mind-altering programme which is designed to attack our beliefs.
At the gates of a primary school in Birmingham, opposition to plans to teach the children about same-sex relationships. The programme was called No Outsiders, but it's now been dropped after parents took around 600 pupils out of the school.
People from the Jewish community, people from the Christian community, atheists, agnostics, Hindus, etc. They've all been saying exactly the same thing. Our parental rights are being breached.
Opposition to the introduction of relationships education appears to be growing, with more protests being planned for later this week.
There's a number of videos and articles you can look at, including a brilliant one by Jessica, which I'll link below, but I just want to quickly recap here. Essentially, the No Outsiders programme was something designed by a teacher, an openly gay teacher within the school. It was a series of 5 lessons that was meant to cover the different protected statuses in the UK, so disability, race, religion, and sexuality. They included reading LGBT inclusive books like Mama, Mummy and Me, which were age appropriate, and discussing people's differences and the idea that we should accept people for who they are. The lessons have now stopped, although there seems to be a bit of confusion and back and forth over whether this was because they were already meant to be stopping and that they had actually finished for the year, or whether it was because of the protest by the parents. Andrew Moffat, who came up with the programme, is an assistant head at the school, and he's been receiving threatening letters and emails. The protester's statement claims that he was promoting personal beliefs about universal acceptability of homosexuality as being normal and morally correct. Promoting normal, morally correct. For all of this, I think the thing to remember primarily is the children. There are children who go to that school who will be LGBT themselves and are now forced every day to confront the idea that their parents, their community would rather protest than let them even hear about themselves in lessons. And it's not just those children whose families are participating in the protest. It's other children at the school who are having to engage with these protests in a learning environment. It's all of the children around the world who will be able to see this protest covered in the news and realise that that is how people feel about them. And it isn't just something that's important to LGBT children themselves. Children who have LGBT family members and friends, children who don't know any LGBT people at all, are being fed this idea that it is inappropriate to even acknowledge them. Education is a massive part of combating homophobia, not just against other people, but also that toxic internalized homophobia against yourself. So why do people use protecting children as a cover for their homophobia? In the UK right now, gay people can get married, they can have and do have children. They are family friendly and school appropriate, because they are what families look like. But that isn't what it's always looked like, of course. Historically, gay parents have been refused custody of their children simply because of their sexuality. In the 1960s and 70s, when there were some public cases of out lesbians attempting to get custody of their children, a national newspaper, the Sunday Express, had this to say: "No child should suffer this trauma. Not the trauma of abuse, not the trauma of neglect, but the trauma of being made to live with a mother who was a lesbian." There are so many other cases, but one always sticks in my mind. In 1999 in Mississippi, a court ruled that a 15-year-old boy would need to stay with his mother rather than go and live with his gay father. His mother, who had married a man who was abusive, had violent outbursts, would often beat her, to the point where this child had had to call 911 because the man had threatened to kill him. Not only was this gay man seen as so unfit to be a parent just for being gay, that it was better that this child stayed in an abusive household, but when it was made provisions for him to visit the child could come live with him in the summer, his partner of 8 years was not allowed to stay in the house. It's been 40 years between the Save Our Children campaign beginning in 1977 and the current state of affairs in 2019. But these aren't two unconnected events. Homophobia is passed like a torch, and the fuel that lights it is the myths that are perpetuated by fear and ignorance. Myths that conjured those words: indoctrination, exploitation. Myths like the inherent sexualization of LGBT people and identities. This is something that I've talked about before, and I can link a video to it. But essentially it's the idea that there is something inherently sexual about LGBTQ+ people, but that this sexuality is specifically expressed in a profane or inappropriate way. It is linked not with healthy sexuality, but with perversion, paedophilia and danger. It's the same idea that gave rise to the corrupting lesbian trope. This is a common motif in lesbian media, the idea of the more experienced, corrupting lesbian, often older, who will come and essentially pervert the desires of a young, innocent flower, a pure girl. In the end of those stories, especially historically, normally the corrupting lesbian will die or have some kind of horrible, tragic end, and the pure flower will be free from her clutches to go back into heteronormative society. And this insidious homophobia, which is present constantly and has been within our society, has long had an effect on our children and education system. And in turn, that lack of comprehensive and inclusive education has raised a generation of children who become the adults who make the decisions about what is appropriate or not, having gone through an education system where they've been told this is not appropriate. A decade after the Save Our Children campaign was forming in the US, across the ocean in the UK, we had the infamous and devastating Section 28.
Now the rest of the news. The government is to ban the promotion of homosexuality in schools.
I obviously don't want children taught that the gay and lesbian lifestyle is natural or normal. It is not, it never has been, and it never will be.
I hesitate to use the word perversion, but let's face up to the truth of this situation. That's what it is.
Again, I've talked specifically about Section 28 in a few videos on my channel. Essentially, it was a clause in a local government's act that would have prohibited the promotion of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. Again, those words, those implications. Promoted, pretended.
Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay.
This homophobia was seen starkly by our government, who passed this legislation, including a right-wing MP. He said, "I do not agree with homosexuality. I think that Clause 28 will help outlaw it and the rest will be done by AIDS. With a substantial number of homosexuals dying of AIDS, I think that's probably the best way."
But small children, some as young as 5, when they start school, have actually had homosexuality thrust at them. There has been a promotional exercise on very young children indeed.
The effects of this legislation were wide-reaching. The teachers and librarians felt like they could not talk about LGBT issues at all for fear of promoting it in some way and losing their jobs. Of course, it also meant that for the most part in formal teacher training, there was no way to deal with LGBT issues. They weren't being discussed, you weren't being taught about how to handle them. And it ended up with this oppressive weight on the shoulders of a generation of LGBTQ+ people, including myself.
This was actually 1988, the year that Section 28 came in. I think I was a very flamboyant, over-the-top, kind of performing teenager at that time, but inside I was traumatised and frightened the whole time.
Even after the clause was repealed in the 2000s, its legacy endured. You'd had years of teachers feeling unable, unsafe, uncertain about teaching, and that didn't just go away overnight. That continued. In my own school, I saw a lot of situations in which outright homophobia wasn't challenged because the teachers didn't feel like they knew how to. The idea that this legislation had enforced that LGBT people, history, issues did not belong in the classroom stayed in people's minds, even though legally it wasn't an issue anymore. When I was at school, as with most schools, our computers had blocking software on them. So you would try and get to a certain site and it would say, this is inappropriate, and then it would give you a reason. Reasons included things like gambling and nudity and pornography. These seem pretty reasonable for a school setting. But when you try to get onto sites like the Stonewall charity website or local LGBT support groups, you were met with a block screen that explicitly said it was blocked for lesbian and gay content. This wasn't content that was not family friendly, this wasn't content that had swear words in it, pornography in it, it was just the fact that it dealt with LGBT issues that meant that it had to be blocked. So upon finding that out, I decided that I was going to make it my mission to take away this particular blocking filter from the computers. I booked in a meeting with the head teacher, I went to speak to her, and I don't know, in my head I kind of thought, this is ridiculous. If I explain this and I explain the impact this could have on vulnerable people, then surely she'll change her mind. I went to the IT technicians and I asked them, is this something that is going to be also blocking things like pornography? Could it all be caught up in one? And they said, nope, the pornography blocker blocks every sexually explicit piece of material. This is only blocking because of lesbian and gay content. So I knew that they didn't have a leg to stand on, but when I went to the meeting with this head teacher, she was saying things and implying things that were horrendous. She would say things like, well, we have a lot of younger students who use these computers, the ones who are under 16. As if when you were 16, you were suddenly allowed to know that gay people existed. Honestly, I was sort of flabbergasted. This was also the time when I used the acronym LGBT and she looked at me like she had no clue what I was talking about. That head teacher left. I had another head teacher come and had to start the process all over again. That head teacher said some great things, including, I can't be homophobic, Rowan, I lived in Brighton, which was a wild ride. But she essentially only agreed after years of me talking about this and getting petitions from the students and trying to make them understand how horrendous it was that they could have students in this school, young, vulnerable students, who would try and find help and would be met with this blocked page. And she said, well, here's the compromise that I'm going to make. I'm going to have it blocked entirely and keep it blocked, but students can come to me and request a password to be getting onto these sites as long as they are over 16 years old. When I suggested that actually going to your head teacher to ask for this password is not a solution to this problem, and I said, okay, well, is there any way we can compromise? Can there be teachers who are visibly, openly, not anti-LGBT, who they might feel safer going to. And she said, no, because don't you think that would be inappropriate? There is a real danger that homosexual teachers, social workers or counsellors, simply by public acknowledgement of their lifestyles, can encourage sexual deviation in children. Essentially implying that if any teachers were allowed to be out in the school, that inappropriate relationships could form with the students. In like 2010. This wasn't that long ago. And this is not something that has been restricted to my school by any stretch of the imagination. This idea that LGBT people have an agenda to indoctrinate and to bring aboard innocent children is something which you can see pretty damn clearly, even this year, in the idea of banned books. So the American Library Association makes an annual list of books that are the most banned or the most challenged. And out of the ones from this year, their top 10, 6 of them were LGBT themed. This is obviously disproportionately high considering the low amount of LGBT books that are published every year. This is still to today seen as something which is inappropriate for children, not in these tiny pockets, in these tiny, one-off schools in an entire country, but expansively. And in turn, all of these messages that we're getting, all of these denials of being able to talk about LGBT issues, not being able to give training to teachers on how to deal with it, create these hotbeds of homophobia within the education system. And never was this more starkly apparent than in the early 2000s, when in America we had what the media referred to as a suicide epidemic of LGBT youth.
Like all of you, I was shocked and saddened by the deaths of several young people who were bullied and taunted for being gay, and who ultimately took their own lives. As a parent of 2 daughters, it breaks my heart. It's something that just shouldn't happen in this country.
Across the states, multiple LGBTQ+ children died by suicide because of the homophobic bullying and harassment that they had suffered. But there also will have been so many more that we were never told about. This led to the formation of the It Gets Better project, known for their viral videos of people, especially celebrities, trying to encourage LGBT youth by saying, it gets better in the future.
You will find your place and it will get better, I promise.
I can definitely tell you, and I didn't believe it, I didn't think it would ever get better, but it really, really does get better.
Focus on the future, don't focus on the problems that you're going through right now.
It is so beautiful, the things that life has waiting for you.
It will get better.
It gets 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 really better.
Everything gets better.
It gets better. It gets great.
You'll look back on the struggles you faced with compassion and wisdom, and that's not just going to serve you, but it'll help you get involved and make this country a better place. As a nation, we're founded on the belief that all of us are equal and each of us deserves the freedom to pursue our own version of happiness, to make the most of our talents, to speak our minds, to not fit in, most of all, to be true to ourselves. That's the freedom that enriches all of us. That's what America's all about. And every day, it gets better.
But a few years later, in 2015, the Centre of Disease Control actually included sexuality for the first time in their massive youth survey. It found that almost a third of LGBT students had tried to kill themselves that year alone, 5 times higher than their straight counterparts. Students need to know that it doesn't just get better in some nebulous future. They need people working towards making their present something that isn't a torturous experience. So we've talked about a number of incidents within the wider historical precedent for what's currently happening in the UK. But the question is, why? Why do people think that it's inappropriate? Why have these myths been perpetuated? And one of the reasons people give is religion. A lot of people talking about the situation in Birmingham are blaming Islam specifically, essentially inferring the idea that these Muslim people are different from normal British people. They have different values. This, as I'm sure you have gathered from this video, is entirely contradicted by the long and torturous history of homophobia that has been perpetuated by people who aren't Muslim. Religious teachings have been a reason and continue to be a reason for the spread of homophobia, but this isn't an absolutist issue. It isn't that all religious people are homophobic and that no non-religious people are. There are plenty of LGBTQ+ religious people, including LGBTQ+ Muslims, and probably the most high-profile Muslim in the country, London's Mayor Sadiq Khan has gone on record to say that he is entirely not in support of what is happening. That being said, as someone who had her education very directly affected by the Christian leanings of a particular teacher in my school, I absolutely am worried about the implication that religion can affect the quality of education that children are getting, especially in regards to just the existence of other human beings and equality within our society. So we need to make room for criticising religion's impact on vulnerable groups without then villainising in turn an entire religious community for the thoughts and beliefs of a subsection of it. Another reason that's given that can tie into people of any belief system is the idea that it is confusing or inappropriate for children in some way. There's this idea, because we live in a heteronormative society in which straight is seen as the default, that explaining LGBT things to children will be too confusing for them, too outside the norm. And I think that's just a reasoning for why we need this education in the first place. If something which is so basic as being gay is confusing and needs to be explained to children, this is something that should be just as acknowledged as straight couples are from the earliest years, surely. We have children who have LGBT family and friends, and they're not confused. The confusion will come from the outside world telling them that their parents are wrong or that they shouldn't have them. It doesn't come from the parents themselves. More education is only going to stop confusion. It isn't going to start it. If we have these lessons which are age appropriate, which the No Outsiders program was and is, then it shouldn't be confusing at all, any more than trying to learn about complex equations is confusing. In fact, it is a lot easier to work out and comprehend than equations. Because my question is, if we start allowing parents to ban their children, even small groups of children in schools, from LGBT lessons, where does that lead next? This year there's a bill in Illinois to introduce mandatory teaching of the kind of efforts and achievements of various protected groups within society. This includes LGBT people specifically, which has become an issue for some Republican lawmakers who want to guarantee an opt-out for parents who want to take their children specifically out of LGBT lessons, including Darren Bailey, who said, "Forcing that information on 5-year-olds and elementary school children is more of an effort of indoctrination." Again, that word spanning decades. And it's still here today. Because the question becomes, what do we do in other lessons where LGBT issues may become apparent? Do we teach Oscar Wilde in English but have no mention of their sexuality for fear that some students' parents will protest? Do we refrain from mentioning the persecution of gay men by the Nazis during the Holocaust as if it never happened? We aren't just one special lesson that you can opt out of. We are everywhere because we are human beings. What if a student comes to a teacher and asks about being gay, whether out of curiosity or desperation? Are we really going to put that teacher in a position where they feel like they can't comfort or reassure that child for the risk of parents, protesting their job? My entire education, the way that it took so long for people like me to even be acknowledged in the classroom, the idea that I felt unsafe with some teachers who would say homophobic things or let it slide when other students said it in the class. This legacy of Section 28 that I had to live through, I can see it happening again. It feels like we're going backwards to the age of Section 28 by proxy, and we cannot let that happen. So I hope you enjoyed, probably isn't the right word, that ramble through homophobic history. If you would like to help support me make these videos, I'm going to leave a link to my Patreon below, along with all my social media, so you can find me all over the internet. In the comments, I'd love to hear your experiences of the education system, whether negative or positive, you know, things that teachers and schools have done that you think have been super valuable. Until I see you next time, bye.